Hey gang, I hope you're all doing well despite these trying times, and I hope more than anything that none of you ever need the information in this video. But it's something that I've needed before, that my friends and family have needed in the past, and I'm hoping that if I make it, enough people will watch it that even if you don't think you need it, if you do come across a situation that flags as strange to you in the future, you will remember this video. Bit of a departure from my usual content in some ways, but as I've been in Australia for the last few months, domestic violence has been a massive topic of conversation over here. And in the UK, there have been a number of attacks on women and girls, as well as rioting by men across the country. And in the US, there are already people sharing safe ways to vote for people who are afraid their partners will not accept who they vote for. Not to mention the myriad of other countries where misogyny is on the rise and domestic violence continues to be prevalent. I'm only talking about these 3 countries in particular because of my direct connection to them. Also, as I was writing the script for this, that Olympian was set on fire by her boyfriend, and the woman in France whose husband recruited almost 100 men from their village to and abuse her came out. And it truly made me despair for humanity. Not all men, but enough. If I wanted to, this whole video could just be me listing off statistics of TV and misogyny and patriarchy across the planet, but that sounds extremely draining. If you want something a bit more like that, I already have a video for you. This video is intended to be a manual of sorts. To be clear, I mean both as somebody in one and as somebody on the outside who suspects their friend or family member might be in one. Now, abusive relationships can come in all shapes and sizes, so for clarity's sake, I'm going to stick to the more broad strokes, but I will go into some specifics along the way. And I know I said I wasn't going to make the whole video about statistics, but I am going to get into some statistics now, so if that's not of interest to you, please skip to this point in the video. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, 17% of women and 5.5% of men have experienced partner violence. 23% of women and 14% of men have experienced partner emotional abuse. 16% of women and 7.8% of men have experienced partner economic abuse. The 2021 Australian Child Maltreatment Study surveyed people aged 16 years and over about experiences of maltreatment as a child. Of people surveyed, around 3 in 10 had experienced sexual abuse by any person. 3 in 10 had experienced emotional abuse by a parent or caregiver. 1 in 11 had experienced neglect by a parent or caregiver. And 2 in 5 had experienced exposure to domestic violence. And as I said earlier, not all men, but more men than women tend to be the culprits of domestic and partner violence, not because of their gender alone, but because of the power dynamic that accompanies it. This isn't to say that women aren't capable of violence, they absolutely are, but men not being believed when they are being abused is also caused by the patriarchy and the prevailing belief that they should man up. So every time that we bring up statistics saying that misogyny is a leading cause of violence, men are the leading cause of violence, those kinds of men tend to cry about it and be like, no, we get abused too. Yeah, the people that aren't believing you are you. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare found in 2021 that 25% of people believed that women who do not leave their abusive partners are partly responsible for violence continuing. 34% agreed it was common for sexual assault accusations to be used as a way of getting back at men. 23% believe domestic violence is a normal reaction to day-to-day stress. 19% agreed that sometimes a woman can make a man so angry he hits her without meaning to. 15% agreed there is no harm in sexist jokes. 41% agreed that many women misinterpret innocent remarks as sexist. 31% did not know that women are more likely to be raped by a known person than a stranger. 41% did not know where to access help for a domestic violence issue. 43% did not recognise that men are the most common perpetrators of domestic violence, and 24% did not recognise that women are more likely than men to suffer physical harm from domestic violence. I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark that 24% was mostly men. According to researchers from Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health in the US, women in the US who are pregnant or who have recently given birth are more likely to be murdered than to die from obstetric causes, and these homicides are linked to a deadly mix of intimate partner violence and firearms. Homicide deaths among pregnant women are more prevalent than deaths from hypertensive disorders, hemorrhage, or sepsis. Extremely fucked up, uncool statistic to learn. And, according to an article in BMC Psychiatry, in terms of prevalence, a worldwide meta-analysis estimated rates of 12.7% abuse, 16.3% for physical neglect, 18.4% for emotional neglect, 22.6% for physical abuse, and 36.3% for emotional abuse across all genders. Domestic and partner violence is the most common, but you can end up in volatile relationships with friends or co-workers as well, and it's very important to recognise that. As somebody who has lived through more than one abusive relationship, and who after each one has sworn to myself that I won't fall into another, I understand how frustrating it is to realize that you're stuck and you didn't see the signs. Not seeing the signs doesn't make you stupid or weak or prone to abusive relationships. It just means that somebody spent time and effort into lulling you into a false sense of security before they struck, and you're not stupid for falling for it. That's why it's effective. It's designed not to be spotted early. Of course, there are the big neon flashing signs, but they tend to show up much later, once you're already so entrenched in a relationship that the other person thinks you won't leave. These include physical violence, screaming at you in public spaces, locking you up, threats on your life, and withholding necessities like food and water. Once things have escalated this far, most people will realize they're in an untenable situation, but by then, it's often incredibly hard to detangle yourself from that person because they have made sure that you're tied to them somehow, either by marriage or pregnancy, or even just because you live together, especially in the cases of friends and family members. In a workplace, you're often tied to a specific office with these people, which will keep you stuck there. Not all abusive relationships will escalate to violence either. If they have coercive control over you, this is still abuse. And not every couple or pair of friends or family members who fight are heading for this dynamic. There is a subtle but distinctive difference, for example, between abusive relationships and toxic ones. As Susan Knapp and Abby Alton Schwartz put it when asked the difference, in a toxic relationship, abusive behaviours may or may not be present, but both parties are participants. This may show up as conversations that frequently escalate into fights or boundaries that are ignored, such as requests to take a time out and discuss things later. Couples who shut each other out in order to hold power are also engaging in toxic behaviour. Toxic relationships tend to be reactive in nature, such as arguments that devolve into screaming matches or name-calling. Reactive fights often become more about the fallout, the insults and shouting, than the original issue. Couples in healthy relationships have arguments, but those are more responsive than reactive and involve listening and working towards a solution or understanding. Sometimes that requires taking a pause before coming back together to speak more calmly. Of course, they were referring specifically to romantic relationships, but this goes for friendships and family members too, even work situations. Where toxic relationships differ from abusive ones is that no one person is in a singular position of power over the other. You might be individually perfectly fine people, but when you come together, you behave in a way that does not reflect either of your best. Some toxic relationships can turn abusive, but just because a situation is toxic doesn't mean anybody is in danger. You should probably still stop being around that person though, just for your own peace. Whether the person abusing you is a partner, a friend, a relative, or something more complicated, I hope this video can help you in some way. Here are some things to look out for. The New Hope organization is where I have pulled a large number of these, but it's not the only website with pointers, and I've added a few of my own, but I've linked the sites below if you want to survey them yourself. To be clear, not every abuser will exhibit all of these, but if your friend or relative or romantic partner is exhibiting more than one or two, it might be time to reevaluate the relationship. Number 1, love bombing. I don't want to say the word abuser too many times in this video, thanks YouTube, so I'm going to switch to Nappensadam for clarity. The Nappensadam will often attempt to ingratiate themselves into your life as quickly as possible. In a romantic context, they will come on strong, either verbally or with gifts and dates, and will attempt to make you feel special by implying that nobody else has ever made them feel this way. This is followed swiftly by pressuring them for a commitment, whether that is saying I love you extremely quickly, making plans to move in together before a year is out, or proposing too early. My father proposed to my mother 3 months in. 6 months after that, they were married. 9 months after their honeymoon, I was born. My friends who've been in abusive relationships have moved in with the Nappensadam within a very short period of knowing them, and that adds an immediate obstacle to you removing yourself once things take a turn. To be clear, not everybody who is flirting with or wooing you is love bombing you. Love bombing has very distinct characteristics. It's often extremely intense. They might make grand gestures or buy you inappropriately expensive gifts in the early stages of the relationship, far before such gestures or gifts are warranted. Love bombing also isn't limited to romantic relationships. Friendships can just as easily fall victim to this, and I know I experienced it from my father as a way of keeping me in the cycle of abuse and to make sure nobody else could accuse him of being bad, because how could he be? He bought us toys and took us to amusement parks and constantly told us he loved us. How could that possibly be abusive? It makes you feel crazy when you try to explain it to people, but there is a reason why the intensity of the affection feels somewhat smothering or flags as uncomfortable to you over time, even if at the beginning it was flattering. It's because it's not normal. There is also an element of control to it that you might miss if you're not looking out for it. They might share all of your interests, or subtly steer the conversation away from things you don't have in common, and they might try to stay in constant communication with you. Which brings me to point number 2, controlling behaviour. This usually starts subtle and often during the love bombing phase, so that by the time you might otherwise have noticed it, you're too enamoured by the rose-coloured glasses to notice. The Nap and Saddam will check up on you, but they will probably frame these as check-ins, and at first they will attempt to dress it up as romantic or just really close friendship or what any parent or sibling or boss would do. I was just thinking of you. I thought you were only out for lunch. I miss you. When are you coming back? Why didn't you invite me? They might request, demand, to know how long an outing or event will be, and if you're not back before then, start calling you out of worry. They might call you while you're out, even before that time has been reached, and pretend to have forgotten what time you said you'd be home. If they know this tactic works, they might escalate it into calling you whenever you leave. We're just gonna have to put up with the planes at this point, I'm sorry. So that eventually you feel pressured into cutting short whatever outing it is, whether it's groceries or visiting family. They might question you about where you go and who with in a way that at first feels normal, but starts to feel invasive over time. They might attempt to control your finances, more on this later, or change your style, who you're allowed to be friends with, and even go as far as stopping you from working in a chosen field. If we're in extreme territory, they might check the odometer on your car, check your call history, browsing history, or demand to read your text messages no matter who you're talking to. They might have installed apps on your phone to track what you're doing on it. A big hint to catch early is if your partner, or friend or relative, starts talking about what you're allowed to do in any context. Considering that you're a whole person, and hopefully an adult, you're allowed to do whatever you like, regardless of if they approve or not. But the Nap and Saddam doesn't see it from that perspective. They see the world through the lens of what they do and do not allow. And if you go against their wishes, in their eyes, you are worthy of punishment. 3. Jealousy and isolation. These two tend to go hand in hand. To a Nap and Saddam, jealousy is proof that they love you. They love you so much that they don't want anybody else to speak to you or even perceive you at all. This is because to a Nap and Saddam, you are not a whole person at all, but a possession that they own. Jealousy is an irrational emotion that I'm sure we've all felt at one time or another, but most of us are able to recognize it for what it is: insecurity. It isn't limited to romantic relationships. Abusive friends will absolutely become possessive of you, and parents or siblings can do the same. They're just less likely to admit to jealousy than a romantic partner is. Romantic Nap and Saddam won't limit their jealousy to potential other partners either. They might be jealous of your friendships, your workmates, your family, or even the children you share. This is where the isolation comes in. They will try to keep you from anybody they deem as in the way of your perfect life together. They might convince you to move to another city where you don't know anybody. They might try to talk you out of a job opportunity because it involves too much time around men or people they don't know. They might refuse to let you go to work or classes altogether. They might belittle and put down the other people in your life so that you feel that it was your decision to cut them out, when in fact you never had issues with those people until the Nap and Saddam came along. They might imply that you have bad taste in friends, or that you don't know how to interpret situations. i.e., if you're casually talking to a workmate of the opposite gender, they will accuse that person of flirting with you even if they weren't, and berate you for being blind to it so that you start to question your own judgment. This is gaslighting. Put a pin in that. They might go as far as to accuse you of flirting with others, or make you renounce opposite gender friendships entirely. If your partner, and this is very important, if your partner starts using words like males and females in polite conversation, run for the hills. I am not kidding. That's the beginning of the incel rabbit hole, and you do not want to see what it's like further down. Nap and Saddam, in line with the controlling behaviour mentioned earlier, may call out of the blue if you're with others, or might drop by unexpectedly. This isn't just to check on you, it's also to destabilise you, because from then on, you're never sure when they might appear, which can cause a lot of uncertainty and anxiety. Number 4. The New Hope page calls my next point Dr. Jekyl and Mr Hyde, and I've never read a more accurate descriptor. The main tactic of a Nap and Saddam is to put you into a state of perpetual destabilization. This is achieved through all of their behaviour, but especially through their, let's charitably call them mood swings. One minute they can be charming and sweet, and the next minute they become angry and explosive. Explosiveness and moodiness are typical of people who beat their partners. It's extremely important to note that this explosiveness does not simply go hand in hand with abuse. It is abusive. Just because your partner isn't hitting you doesn't mean you're not being mistreated. DV isn't just the physical violence that people envisage. The violence can be threatened or physical in the sense of punching walls and breaking things. The threat of consequences is often enough to scare somebody into compliance. Because of the aforementioned destabilization, you're never quite sure if they might follow through on the threats, which is what keeps you down. An example of this and how it's used to implement coercive control is from somebody I know who has children, and when they were little, her Nap and Saddam used to get really angry at her and grab the kids and say he was taking them to the park or something, but also make coded or occasionally blatant threats about driving into a tree or off a bridge. Then, when she got upset or seemed so relieved when they got home safe, he'd be so offended that she could possibly believe he would ever hurt his baby girls. By doing this, he turned the attention away from his bad behaviour and made her believe she was the bad one for thinking such terrible things about her partner, who would never do something so terrible, and how could you possibly think he would? To directly quote her, I was always 99% sure he wouldn't do anything. But what about that 1%? The consequences of being wrong about that 1% were extremely high risk. Trust your instincts. If you tell yourself that you don't think the Nap and Saddam would lay a hand on you, but you're still irrationally afraid of that, how irrational is that fear? A big sign for a lot of people that their partner or friend or family member is actively abusing them and not just suffering from mental health issues is that when they're angry and destructive, they're able to control it when others are around. Or they only destroy your belongings and manage to leave theirs unscathed. If either of those things are true of the person you're thinking of, while they tell you they just can't help it sometimes, or that I'm trying but you make me so mad I can't control it, it will not stick to property damage. It will eventually escalate to physical violence. People, but let's be honest, it's usually men, who break plates and punch holes in walls at the drop of a hat are dangerous, and you should be incredibly wary of early signs like that to get the hell out. It's not just the sweet versus the violent, however, it's also the sweet versus neglectful. People often forget that neglect is a category of abuse, but it's one of the most psychologically damaging things you can do to somebody. Your Nap and Saddam might never raise a hand to you, but they might completely shut you out when they're upset to an unreasonable degree. They might ignore you, brush you off, talk down to you, make you feel small and pathetic. They might withhold information from you to test you, withhold affection to their discretion, or even withhold necessities like food, promising to come to events and then backing out last minute, or not even telling you at all, or deliberately scheduling things in conflict with you to show you that you're worth less to them than whatever else they want to do, is also a commonly used tactic. The Mr. Hyde, for some people, might not be a fist-swinging monster. It might be a cold statue, and that can be just as scary and damaging. Number 5, unrealistic expectations and blames you or others for not meeting them. The Nap and Saddam will expect you to be perfect and then blame you when you don't match up to the imaginary version of you they've created in their head. You have to meet all of their needs, but they don't have to meet all of yours. If you're doing most of the emotional or invisible labor in the relationship and they're still nitpicking everything you do, this isn't because you're not good enough, but because there is nothing you can do that will make them acknowledge you. As somebody whose first exposure to emotional abuse was via parenting, this one hits especially close to home. They may also make grand, sweeping statements like, if you love me, then I'm all you need type vibe. If you bring up the issues, they might turn it back around on you. If you love me, why can't you get past this? Or, I work so hard to put food on the table and you can't even do some housework. Or, I hosted your birthday party last week, you can't do something for me? The Nap and Saddam does not take responsibility for their problems and will attempt to make themselves the victim in every situation, including the ones they started. They might scream or hit you, and then once the moment has passed, they might apologize in tears until you're comforting them for hurting you. Yes, I do speak from experience. Why do you ask? Number 6, hypersensitivity and the resulting verbal abuse. This constant blame also comes from the Nap and Saddam's hairpin trigger. They are often the kind of person who angers easily. They will blow things out of proportion, and they are easily insulted. Reasonable responses, such as, but you promised you'd let me take a break from the dishes tonight, or he's a friend from work, we barely talk, or no, you said it was my turn to choose what we eat, are taken as a personal attack. For From their perspective, you're being spiteful or arguing with them, even though without their short fuse, it wouldn't be an argument to begin with. This hypersensitivity ties into their hairpin trigger and their control, or supposed lack of control, of their emotions. The ability to control it while pretending they can't is something that can really mess with you as a victim. An example of this is that when one of my abusers was angry, they used to lift their hands over their head like they were about to hit me, and when I flinched or reacted in fear, they would immediately drop their hand and be so offended that I could ever think they would hit me. And then the dynamic of the altercation would shift, and the onus would be on me to comfort them. As mentioned in the previous example, I was the mean one for daring to think that of them. This was how a lot of those cycles repeated themselves. I would reach a point where I was crying or having a panic attack or trying to leave, and then the tables would be turned onto me, and my abuser would prostrate themselves before me and apologize and cry until I was holding them and promising that I forgave them and that they didn't do anything wrong. And then things would be good. For a while. But you're always walking on eggshells, even when things are good, because one wrong move could flick that switch again. And it reached a point where my abuser would get angry at me if I didn't forgive them fast enough. This hypersensitivity almost always leads directly to verbal abuse. They will degrade you in any way they can to make you feel small. This isn't just to keep you stuck with them by thinking they're the best you can do, but it's also a crux of their behaviour because they enjoy being cruel. They will call you names, tell you that you're stupid or unable to function without them, and act like they're the only reason you can survive and that you'd fail if you cut contact with them. They'll put down any accomplishment you make, however small. They will put down and embarrass you in public and cover it by pretending to be joking, or, in much worse cases, not cover their intentions at all.
So I almost got married one time, and the relationship was like profoundly emotionally abusive. And one thing that I do remember, like we worked on a cruise ship for a period of time together, and as part of our job we like sometimes had to like go have dinners with some of the guests. It was like fine, it's great or whatever. He was British, so he would make these like mean-spirited jokes like, oh, I've tried to explain rugby to her, the old ball and chain, but she's too stupid to understand. And I was like, in reality I was like, no, you never talk about rugby with me. You don't want me involved in that part of your world, which I'm fine with. Like I'm fine with you having things outside of me. But it was moments like that I think really clicked with me more so than like some of the like more egregious stuff, like the stuff that like my mom would have to remind me of. Where I'd be like, why does he talk about me like this? Like why does he talk about me like he doesn't like me and like he resents me and like he looks down on me? And I really think that it's like moments like that like make you, when you're in like a toxic relationship, realize like how toxic it is, because it's like you humiliate me in front of people, like either our friends or like people that we don't even know, because you think it's fun and funny, and you think that you can have like a moment of communion with these like other men by humiliating the women in your life.
If anybody you care about begins to talk down to you or degrade you or ignore your accomplishments, even if you don't believe that person is abusive, you should consider going low or no contact with them. That person is supposed to love and support you, and if they're not even doing that at a base level, then you cannot make them see you as worthwhile, no matter what you achieve. Go and find somebody who will appreciate you, whether that's romantic or platonic, because being stuck in a relationship like that will only destroy your self-esteem. A very simple thing to do, if you're not sure, is to think about how you feel when you're with them. If you permanently feel like you're walking on eggshells even when things seem fine, it's probably abusive. Number 7, financial abuse. This is something that often goes overlooked when discussing DV, but definitely falls under it. I've read 100 Reddit stories of people whose parents are absolutely rinsing them for cash, and they've come to ask if it's normal because it feels too much, only to be told they're actually a victim of DV. You might assume that your partner or parent or friend know better than you, but there are definitely signs that they're abusing your trust. Is the Napansaram overly invested in your finances? This can also include stopping you from getting a job or forcing you to get loans you don't want, and even, especially in the case of elder abuse, making you change your will. But it can also be more insidious. Things such as not giving you access to shared bank accounts, denying you access to money so you can't afford basic expenses like food or medicine, or lending you that money in order to pressure you for it at a later date, giving them further control over you. Destroying, damaging, or stealing your or shared property. Racking up debt on shared accounts or joint credit cards. Withholding financial support like child support payments or rent. Refusing to work or contribute anything to the household income, thus putting all the pressure on you to be the sole provider, or stopping you from getting a job or going to work, and then using their role as breadwinner to coerce or pressure you. Gambling away shared money. Taking control of the finances and controlling how all of the household income is spent. For example, demanding to know your wages and your spending habits while refusing to show you their own. Or charging you unfair rent or splitting costs unevenly to keep you in the red. This includes if you are paying 50-50 on the rent and they earn more than you. That is unfair. That's not equitable. 50-50 in that case is not equal. If they earn twice as much as you, they should be paying 2/3 of the rent. This is very basic maths, but it's very easy to trick people with it. There are more signs to look out for that I've linked below because financial abuse covers a lot of bases, especially with family and elder abuse, such as wire and credit card fraud. In many cases, it goes hand in hand with emotional abuse because the pressure of not having enough money is enough to make anybody feel trapped. Relationships aren't transactional. They're reciprocal. If they chose to spend all their money on you without any agreement that it would be paid back beforehand, they can't come back at a later date and demand cash from you. If your Nap and Saddam keeps moving the goalposts on how much you owe them, that is not a parent or a partner. That is a loan shark. Number 8. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is a word that has become woefully misused and overused by the internet, but it has a very specific definition, one which I've already outlined in one of my previous videos. It comes from the 1944 film Gaslight, in which a husband tries to convince his wife she's going insane, so that she doesn't notice he's trying to steal from her.
You had nothing in your hand.
What?
I was staggered.
What reason?
I didn't know that about your mother. She died in an asylum when you were a year old. It began with her imagining things, that she heard noises, footsteps, voices. And then the voices began to speak to her. Now perhaps you will understand why I cannot let you meet people.
And this letter from Sergius Bauer to Alice Alquist was written 2 days before her murder.
But he said there wasn't any letter. He said I was going out of my mind.
Not going out of your mind. You're slowly and systematically being driven out of your mind.
Why?
Perhaps because you found this letter know too much. Or because then he would have control of your property.
People are quick to label any kind of lying as gaslighting, and while being lied to is horrible, it isn't always because you're being gaslit. All gaslighters are liars, but not all liars are gaslighters. All thumbs are fingers, but not all fingers are thumbs. The Nap and Saddam starts by denying their actions or rewriting history. If they hit you, they will claim this never happened. Or if this doesn't work outright, they will shift to minimizing it or shifting blame onto you, i.e., I didn't even hit you that hard, or you deserved it. Or, if you behaved better, I wouldn't need to do this. Oh, I hate doing that. They will attempt to discredit you, not just to others, but to yourself, implying that you aren't remembering the events right, telling you that nobody else believes you, claiming to have no idea what you're talking about, and even using the tactics I mentioned earlier, like being offended you'd even suggest it. They'll deflect any possible blame they can onto you, calling you too sensitive or claim to be joking if it goes too far. Their main goal is to make you question your own recollection of events, or even question your own sanity, because the less comfortable you feel talking about what's happening to you to others, the easier it is for them to get away with it. Phrases like, you never remember things correctly, this is another ridiculous idea of yours, you know you have a bad memory, and you know I love you, I'd never hurt you on purpose, are extremely common in these situations. The worst kind of gaslighting is when they attempt to convince the victim that they are the problem. Accusing you of starting it when you didn't, tone policing you and telling you to stop yelling when you're not, using your past actions to justify their own negative behaviour, i.e. you were in a shitty mood 2 years ago, but it gets brought up in every single argument even though you're well past it by now. Any single negative action you've displayed in their presence will be used as ammunition in their barrage against you, to convince you that not only are they not the bad person, but you're even worse. And the more they do this, the harder it is to detach their version of reality from your own, especially in cases of reactive self-defense. If you're scared of them and you lash out, or they shove you up against a wall and you slap them, or you've repeatedly asked them to back off and have expressed that you will use physical means if they don't, and they continue to disregard your wishes and boundaries, and then your only recourse to escape is to shove them back or push them, hit them, which they can then use to manipulate you into thinking that you are the aggressor in that situation. But they put you in an unwinnable position where your options were either shove them, hit them, or let them do it to you.
Stop.
No. Now, maybe this will resolve itself, but no. Never prevent someone from leaving the room or going where they want to go, particularly in a situation like this. That is highly concerning, that she's saying, get out of my way, let me go, don't touch me. She has said it multiple times, and he's escalating the restraint. Not okay. Not okay.
And that happens in a surprising amount of domestic abuse cases, and a lot of men have been able to manipulate things by implying that she's just as bad. I'm not naming any particular names, but I'm sure you can probably think of something that happened in the news a little while ago that may have had these connotations. They can then use that against you by saying that you were physically violent or verbally violent first. It's not true. It might even come through in less obvious ways, like offhandedly telling you what food you like and dislike, what movies you prefer, or telling you what emotions you're feeling, rather than asking, calling you irrational, hysterical, or even saying you're tired as a way to explain away your feelings at their actions. Gaslighting, at its core, is lying to you with such frequency and barefacedness that you start to feel insane. They will double down and refuse to admit the lie even when you show them proof. They might even refuse to listen altogether and change the subject when you try to bring up their behaviour. They will insist that an event or behaviour you witnessed never happened and that you're remembering it wrong, and accuse you of overreacting or twist the story in their own favour when you call them out. They might even talk about you behind your back, or tell you that other people are spreading rumours about you in order to limit the people you feel you can trust. Then, they'll smooth everything over with supposedly loving gestures or words, or even imply that they're the benevolent one for putting up with you, that they've overcome so much in order to love you. I had a friend who was really sexually aggressive with me, then turn around when I wanted to stop being friends with them, accuse me of being sexually aggressive with them. I'm asexual. Some of the shorter but no less important signs to look for include playful, use of threat or force. The nap and Saturn may only make veiled threats or hide it all under the guise of a joke. They might throw or hold you down, may press you into doing things you're not comfortable with. In romantic contexts, this definitely includes sex, and especially if your partner is demanding sex when you are sick or too tired, or even if you just plain do not want to. If they expect certain sexual acts just for the low bar of being a good partner, then they're not a good partner. These playful jabs might escalate into actual threats and violence, such as shoving you against a wall, restraining you, breaking things either because of their sentimental value to you or to frighten you into submission by throwing them at you or within close range. Threats of suicide. Don't know how I'm going to say this on YouTube. Thanks again, Queens. And awesome the way you've set up this site. But a very common abuse tactic is to threaten self-harm, or worse, in order to keep you under their thumb. If you leave me, I'll die is a sentiment that is incredibly manipulative, regardless of the nature of your relationship, implying that they might do something out of anger or heartbreak in order to put the blame on you, which is clever, because they're not threatening you, but themselves. One common refrain I heard was, "Why don't I just drive my car through a brick wall?" as they were getting in their car, only to hear radio silence from them for hours until they returned. Looking back, it's very clear that they were never in any danger from themselves. They only meant to make me sweat. But I didn't know that at the time, and I would spend hours having panic attacks or call for help, only to be berated for calling anybody, because how could I not know they would be fine? Now you've made everything worse. I've also had an abuser actually follow through on these threats, or at least attempt to, in order to legitimize their control. The idea being, it will be your fault and you will have to live with the guilt forever. And then I became paralyzed to do anything, because if I tried to leave or made one misstep, they might hurt themselves, and then that would be on me. But it's not. It's on them. I've been for a significant portion of my life. Never have I ever put that responsibility on the shoulders of anybody else unless I was actually asking for help. But these people aren't doing that. They're not saying these things to you so you'll help them. They're saying them to exercise coercive control. If they might die if you leave them, then you can never leave. Casual cruelty. Insert Taylor Swift joke here. The Nap and Saddam may punish animals or children brutally or be insensitive to their pain. They might overreact to the slightest missteps. They might watch videos of animal cruelty and find them funny rather than upsetting, and not understand why you might be upset. They may have unfair expectations of children or tease them until they cry without seeming to realize their actions. They will often act offended if you call them out for this behavior, and will especially lean on the "I was only joking" or "they deserved it" narratives to justify it. Past history.
Foreshadowing is a literary device, and
this feels like it should go without saying, but if the Nap and Saddam has a history of abusing or battering partners, get out. If they admit to past actions, but caveat it with "she deserved it," or they don't admit to it, but have one too many crazy exes that suddenly left them, that is a red flag.
Like, every man in here is just like, "Oh, remember Christine? Christine was crazy." I had my new girl, Christine comes like, "Where that bitch at?" I was like, "Christine, what's going on? I got my new girl, get out of Yeah, Christine was crazy, right? Christine was crazy. Oh, the memories. And I was like, why don't women have crazy men stories? Like, why don't women have crazy men stories? I don't really hear them. And then I realized, I was like, oh, it's because if you got a crazy boyfriend, you gon' die.
It doesn't matter what they try to dress it up with, situational circumstances do not cause a person to have an abusive relationship. Distrust of professional help, or overly trusting of pseudoscience. If a man tells you not to see a doctor, or go to therapy, or take medication, run from that man. Sorry, that's a stereotype. There are women, and I'm sure non-binary people, who think this way too. Being abusive is inclusive of the gender spectrum, but it is usually men who parrot things like this. If a man uncritically listens to Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, or Andrew Tate, if he watches alpha content or follows a lot of maximizing content, if he is overly invested in pseudoscience or pop psychology, and especially if he's parroting the gender binary in a way that benefits only him, you sprint from that man in the opposite direction. Same goes for a woman who is overly invested in traditional roles. And I don't mean someone who just wants to be a stay-at-home mum. You know the kind of person I'm talking about. Finally, how do you feel versus how do they feel? Despite their hairpin trigger or supposed anger issues, when you leave an argument with them, do they seem tired? Because one of the biggest signs for me and many other people that I've spoken to since leaving abusive situations is that the Nap and Saddam seems to thrive on arguing, while you're exhausted by it. After a confrontation, I need to have a long shower, go for a walk, or lie in the dark for 6 hours, sometimes all 3. It's extremely draining to have to defend yourself all the time, especially when the attack comes out of nowhere and feels unwarranted. Meanwhile, they will leave confrontations feeling more energized and can often switch straight from arguing to playing nice with others, which enables them to get the upper hand in social situations as well. They might start a screaming match and then invite your friends over so you're forced to put on a good face, which you might find excruciating, while they appear to be navigating it with ease or even relishing in your discomfort. When you're stressed, do they offer assistance or brush you off with "we're all doing it tough"-like sentiments? When they're stressed, do they expect you to tend to their needs? If you threw the same "we're all struggling" sentiment back at them, would they take it well? Or would they accuse you of being spiteful and start a fight? If you're spending all of your energy on managing how somebody else feels, it's hard to focus on how you're feeling, which can leave you spending most days completely drained and dejected. The Nap and Saddam is banking on the idea that if you don't even have the energy to take time for yourself, then you definitely won't have the energy to cut them off, because that is a huge hurdle to jump. It's hard to even admit to yourself that you want to get out, let alone put that desire into action. It can make you feel guilty or like a bad person, and if you've built a life around this person, whether romantic or otherwise, there's definitely a level of sunk cost fallacy to it. You've spent so much of your time and money and energy into ingratiating this relationship into your life, and now you're just going to rip it out? It feels like if you admit that the relationship isn't healthy, that you've somehow wasted time, and admitting that can be the first step in getting out, but it's also often the hardest. You want to believe that at their heart, the Nap and Saddam is a good person because you love them and they're supposed to love you, and you've spent so much time becoming a version of yourself that they like best. But it will never be good enough. They will never stop moving the goalposts, and you will keep chipping away parts of yourself to appease them until nothing of you is left. Or, as Daniel Sloss put it, much more eloquently,
my ex-girlfriend was, without a doubt, the single worst human being I've ever met in my life. She created this perfect person, this act that she'd act out in public, who everyone fell in love with, who my friends fell in love with, who my family fell in love with, who I fell in love with. She was flawless, and then behind closed doors, she was entirely different because she knew I wouldn't have an argument if I then went out into the real world. I'd be like, she's being a bitch, and they're like, oh, she's fucking perfect. How are you ruining this, Daniel? She would find people that I loved and trusted more than her and then turn me on them so that she was the center of my life. If you do not love 100% of who I am, you do not love me. You love an idea of me which you have falsely fabricated in your head, and it is not my fault if I do not live up to those expectations.
As a side note, every single person on earth should watch this special. I'm serious. Even if only for the second half where he discusses relationships, it will change your life.
I mean this. You have to learn to love yourself before you can allow someone else to do it as well. Right? If you only love yourself at 20%, that means somebody can come along and love you 30%, and you're like, wow, that's so much. It's literally less than half. Whereas if you love yourself 100%, that means the person that falls in love with you has to go above and beyond the call of duty to make you feel special, and that's something every single one of us deserves.
I have showed this to everybody I know who is in some kind of shitty situation with a partner or a friend or a relative, and every single time they have ended up walking away from that situation. Something incredibly important to mention is that most people in abusive relationships leave more than once and end up coming back. On average, a person in a volatile situation like this will leave 7 times before finally leaving for good. A lot of people have the instinct to say, why didn't they leave? But the more accurate way of framing that question is, what was put in place to stop them? As the National Domestic Violence Hotline points out, abusive relationships are extremely complex situations, and it takes a lot of courage to leave. Abuse is about power and control. When a survivor leaves their abusive relationship, they threaten the power and control their partner has established over the survivor's agency. This often causes the partner to retaliate in harmful ways. As a result, leaving is often the most dangerous period of time for survivors of abuse. If you're thinking of breaking up with a partner or moving out of a friend or relative's house, be careful. Plan ahead. Have people who can help you. Visit a DV center or call a helpline. Try to move out slowly or pick a day when that person is out. Erase your internet history. Do everything you can to mitigate them finding out and mitigate additional violence. Or, if you're not living together, cut all contact on social media and make sure other people in your life know to keep that person away from you. Your safety is paramount. Not only are you more at risk when leaving, but there's also a sense of shame accompanying it, not just for getting stuck in that situation, but also for breaking the image that others on the outside might have had. Nap and Saddam do their best to put their best face forward to other people, and as a result, it can feel as if when you leave, people might not understand why you're throwing away a good thing. Shame can absolutely be a reason why people get stuck, and it can also hinder the healing process afterwards. It's not your fault. It's nobody's fault but the person doing the harm. Particularly due to family and societal pressures, it can be hard not to want to fix the relationship, and that's often most of our first thought. It's also why a lot of people go back. The person promises they've changed, that they'll never behave that way again, and you believe them because they're good at lying, and also because you love them and you're trying to see the best in them. Love isn't rational, and it's hard to understand why somebody would go back from the outside, but when you've been through it, you know what it's like. Not only that, but you might be living together and have nowhere to go. You might be in a shared friend group and have to walk away from everybody, not just that person. You might be close with their family, or they might be close with yours, and you're scared of the truth being twisted if you walk away. If they're charismatic enough, they might be able to make you look like the bad guy. It's a common refrain for partners to claim that their victim cheated as a way of justifying their behavior, even if it's not true. Even if it was true, wouldn't justify the behavior. But one of my friends literally had her abusive ex call her family and spread lies about her, tell them that she cheated. You might share a pet or children together and be terrified of what will happen if you try to leave, if they'll try to take them away from you. Or you might even fear for your belongings. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, you have to be willing to leave some things behind. Possessions are not worth more than your health and safety. One of my friends had her abusive ex-boyfriend destroy half of her belongings when she left, including books from family members and things that meant a lot to her personally. And although she was relieved to escape with her life, she'll never get those back. But she had to learn to be okay with that. One of the hardest things to realize when leaving for the final time is that you're not going to fix the abusive nature of the Nap and Saddam. They will continue to be what they are. And even if they could fix themselves, that doesn't mean that you need to forgive them or allow them back into your life. It is not your responsibility to make the Nap and Saddam a better person. Okay, that was extremely heavy. How about a small montage of the animals I've met over the last few months to cleanse the palate before we move on? Signs from the outside. These are a lot harder to pass through because you're not usually with your friends and family members 100% of the time, so you don't always see things right away. Plus, the person is usually putting on a front specifically so that you don't see the signs. However, if you're starting to have suspicions that something is off, it's a good idea to check with other people first that they have noticed the same things, or even with people who don't know that person to get an outside perspective before you bring it to them. This is for a variety of reasons, but not least because the person in an abusive relationship might be too scared to admit it, or might even lash out at you for suggesting it. It's important not to be cowed by an overly negative reaction, because if they are in a bad situation, they need you and as much empathy as you can muster.
I think it is like this case of like everybody sees like a little snapshot of the abuse, but nobody sees the totality of it.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, even you and I who have like experiences with this, like in our personal lives and also with like friends of ours, like we can see one instance of like a domestic dispute of some kind and just like write it off and be like, this is just like an argument that they're having. But like, it's only if you get to see a totality of evidence that you're like, okay, this is a problem. Yeah. One argument in isolation is not going to convince you.
Also, don't bang on about it. If they, or the Nap and Saddam, perceive you to be overly critical of their relationship, they might start to shut you out, which is the last thing you want.
Well, yeah, and especially when you've gone back. There's not that much people are going to say to you. Like at that point, a lot of people do the thing that I think at some point we all actually do in some ways have to do and say like, if she needs me, I'm here. If she asks for something, I'm here. But I can't keep getting involved and telling her to leave or whatever because
she's not ready. Jesus. Like I've tiptoed very carefully around other friends who've had like abusive relationships where until they actually say, I'm leaving, I'm getting out of this, I'm like, he's so nice and I get why you love him, but like that was like not an okay thing to do, where I have to like play this like fun push and pull game, because if you outright say like, this is fucked up, he's abusing you, leave, that person will cut you out of their life instantly. And they will tell their partner that you said that. No, it doesn't help at all. They'll tell your partner. Yeah, you will never have access to them again. So you have to play this game, and then you can't actually say until she's gone. Like, that entire time I was like worried for you and crying for you, and I didn't say the things that I wanted to say because I was afraid I would lose you.
Bring it up once or twice, gently, and if you're rejected, do not bring it up to them again for a while, unless they are in objective danger and you feel the need to step in.
I've definitely had to like cross that line before I thought the time had come.
Right.
Just because like there's also that nagging thought in your head where it's like, what if they just need a single person to validate them? And that might be enough for one person to say, you're actually not crazy. Right. And it's the risk there is so high. But if a friend ever turned to me and said, he's going to kill me one day, like the way
witness protection right now.
That was like the way I would be like, okay, we're getting a go bag. Like, you live with me now. We'll bring Angus to the
and we live in Wyoming?
Yeah. You live with me now. We have different names.
I'm growing a mustache. It's going to take a lot of minoxidil.
And so are you.
Saying something, even once, will let them know that they're not alone. And when they do leave, they'll remember the people who noticed, and they'll know they have people they can call. My mother told me, after she divorced my father, a whole bunch of people came out of the woodwork saying, we knew he was bad news. And she was just frustrated by it, because none of them said anything. They waited until the danger was over to be like, I always knew. All right, didn't think to say, step in, cause a scene. Jesus. It's an incredibly hard tightrope to walk between saying too much and not saying enough, and a lot of it is situational. But if you care about somebody and you're worried about their physical or mental health and safety, all you can do is your best. So, here are some signs to look out for. 1. Friend or family member is pulling away. The first and most obvious hint that something might be hinky about your friend or family member's relationship is that they are pulling away from you. This includes romantic partners as well, by the way. Your romantic partner could be being abused by a friend or a relative. Don't get me wrong. Relationships change and you could just be growing apart, but if there was a noticeable shift when a new person entered their life, it could be throwing up some red flags. Especially if they start to change plans, both short and long term. Short term, this can present in a few ways. For example, they sound excited for coffee with you or a weekend away, but once they leave and are in the presence of the Nap and Saddam again, suddenly changes their mind and say they're not up for it or can't go. They might start to run late for events or leave early, where they never used to before. But this also affects long-term plans, such as leaving a job they were passionate about, dropping out of school, or moving cities without warning or to somewhere where they know very few people. Nap and Saddam want to isolate their victims, and they do this in a variety of ways, so it's vital to attempt to keep contact even if they aren't as responsive. Number 2, the other person seems overly involved. If the Nap and Saddam invites themselves to events they're not included in, or checks in with your friend multiple times, even for pre-planned events, if they are asking about who they were with, if they start to dictate how much time your friend can spend with you, or put parameters on it, these are all worrying signs. If they share locations with the Nap and Saddam, it might not necessarily mean they're in a bad situation. A lot of people share locations nowadays. But if the Nap and Saddam gets aggressive or calls and texts if they're in a new location, or if the plans change and they forgot to text them, this is definitely a red flag. If at any point your friend has to check with the Nap and Saddam before agreeing to anything, that they used to be able to accept without thinking, this is something to keep an eye on. If they're not allowed to do certain things that used to be fine because it makes the Nap and Saddam uncomfortable, such as wear particular clothes, go to specific places, or participate in certain activities, big neon flashing red flag. If there are cameras inside their house, I know I don't have to say this, but Times Square sized big red flag, that person should be jailed. Number 3, the Nap and Saddam berates or degrades them in front of others. If the Nap and Saddam degrades them in front of you, even jokingly, keep your eye on them, especially if your friend doesn't laugh along. Derogatory jokes about people are fine when everybody is in on the joke, but if it seems as if the jokes are pointed or mean-spirited or they rub you up the wrong way, call it out. Ask why those jokes are supposed to be funny. Make the Nap and Saddam explain it to you. This will be uncomfortable for everybody, but it will show them that you're not willing to put up with that behavior. I'm especially talking to men here. If your boys are making shitty, misogynistic jokes, call it out. Once again, to quote Daniel Sloss,
I knew this man for 8 years and he fucking did it. There are monsters amongst us and they look like us. If you are sick of the narrative that is currently going on about men, feel free to change it, but you have to get involved. But when 1 in 10 men are shit and the other 9 do nothing, they might as well not fucking be there. Instead of having this fucking hero complex of being like, I'm gonna beat up a rapist, fucking prevent one, stop one, because I know it can be done, because I know how I fucking failed at it. Because if I'm being 100% honest with myself, were there signs in my friend's behavior over the years towards women that I ignored? The answer is yes. And then he raped my friend, and that's on me until the day I die. Talk to your fucking boys.
Nobody should be berated by their partner or friend or parent in a public setting. This won't fix any problems, but will only serve to shame them and make them feel less comfortable coming forward with their feelings because they've been belittled in front of others. If the Nap and Saddam feels comfortable shouting at or berating their partner in public, how do they behave when there are no witnesses to their behavior? Number 4, your friend's appearance changes drastically. If your friend changes their entire style or their hobbies after entering a relationship or meeting a new friend or going back home to visit family, this isn't always an indication of a problem. Sometimes they're trying new things, or they're tired of their old style, but it can be an issue. If the Nap and Saddam wants them to dress a particular way or have a certain hair color or wear makeup or not wear makeup, they might not say so outright, but they might draw attention to the changes in group settings in order for you to compliment them or subtly throw shade at their previous style. One of my abusers used to draw attention to me wearing too much makeup, but then get annoyed at me if I didn't dress slutty enough. Good times. The most worrying version of this is when somebody loses or gains weight over a short period of time. Particularly if you suspect that somebody you know has developed an eating disorder, whether out of stress or pressure from their partner to look a certain way. You need to seek help for them. Eating disorders can kill you. And even if they don't, they can cause a myriad of health problems further down the line. I have linked resources down below for anybody who isn't sure of how to approach this delicately. Each situation is unique and it's up to your discretion how you act, but it's a really scary place for that person to be in, and they should be provided with the help they need as soon as possible to mitigate any permanent damage to their body and health. 5, their personality changes. This final sign sounds the most obvious, but especially if you're spending a lot of time with somebody, it might be so gradual that it takes a while to notice. A once bubbly person might become subdued and anxious, or somebody who would never previously put themselves in dangerous situations might start to do so. People who have never done drugs or drank before might start to develop dependencies which seem to be spurred on by the Nap and Saddam, or at the very least, not dissuaded from it. If somebody you know starts to put themselves down more, be more self-critical, call themselves names, even semi-jokingly, or refuse to acknowledge their accomplishments, this is a worrying sign. It means that somebody is convincing them they're not good enough, whether directly or through the more obscure tactics I listed earlier. The very least that somebody who loves you can do is care about you. If somebody is speaking like that about themselves in public and the Nap and Saddam doesn't chime in to make them feel better or change their mind, it's a fairly safe bet that they're the person who has put those thoughts into that person's head in the first place. Nap and Saddam want their victims to have low self-esteem because the worse they feel about themselves, the more they believe they deserve to be treated the way they're being treated, the more they'll put up with, and the less likely they are to leave. That all sounds very bleak, doesn't it? So here's what you can do. You personally, right here, right now. If you are worried about your friend or family member or boyfriend or girlfriend or non-binary friend, the best thing you can do is read up on domestic situations in order to work out the best approach. Find out where your local DV centers are or if they have hotlines. Subtly discuss finances with your friend. If you're willing to let them move in with you, make that clear. Or research places that could take them in. Can they leave their job? Can they move cities? Are they safe? Or is there a possibility of danger to them or their pets or children? Do you need to get the police involved? Now, don't get me wrong, ACAB, and also particularly in terms of domestic SA and stalking cases, police fucking suck. But sometimes, they can be helpful. It is an unfortunate reality that more often than not, trying to turn somebody into the police or serving them with a restraining order will make them act more violently and can escalate into extremely dangerous situations. I cannot stress this enough. Do not blindly get the police involved. But in select situations, they can be helpful. For example, when one of my friends left their abusive partner, they called the police to supervise as they packed up the last of their belongings in order to prevent their ex from destroying anything or attacking them. Or, if you're unwilling to get the police involved, fair, could you mobilize other friends or family members to help? Oftentimes, abusers don't want to be seen as bad people. They want to control the narrative, so if you can bring other people in, it might prevent them from doing something to escalate. Something that might be incredibly helpful, especially if they live with the person they're trying to escape from, is to provide space for their things. As previously mentioned, the most dangerous time for victims is when they're leaving. So if possible, it would be best for the Nappensaddam not to know they're planning to leave until they're already gone. Can they sneak some of their things out to your place every week? Slowly removing their things can be really beneficial. The ideal time to leave is when the Nappensaddam is away, either at work or on a trip in some capacity, in which case, can you be there for your friend? Can you pet sit the day they leave so the stress of taking the animals is off their shoulders? Can you bring an additional vehicle to help them pack their things into? Even just being there to hold their hand and cry with them can be massively impactful. Not to mention, if the Nappensaddam returns early, having somebody there might alleviate the situation somewhat. If you can't be there physically, can you be there emotionally? Call them, let them call you. Make sure they know that you are a safe space for them and a shoulder to lean on when they need. So much of removing somebody from a bad situation is making them realize that they deserve better. So reminding them of their positive qualities, gassing them up, making sure they know their own worth is a vital part of the process. It won't be easy, and they might return to their abuser even after all the work you've put in, but it's important not to give up. Victims usually leave more than once. Average is 7 times before they are finally free. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but don't expect it to be a switch flicked overnight. You might have to be extraordinarily patient with your friend, and you will get frustrated and upset sometimes. The important thing is not to take that frustration out on them, because that will only cause them to retreat from you, and they might be less likely to open up to you in the future. You'd become a part of the problem, not a part of the solution. 90% of helping somebody recover from DV, whether it's romantic, familial, or friend-based, is holding their hand, both metaphorically and physically. Their instincts will tell them that nobody can be trusted, that everybody is trying to manipulate them, and your job is to prove them wrong. Hold their hand, and even if they try to make you let go, don't be too angry at them. Just let them know that you'll always be there if they need a hand again. If you are in an abusive relationship, you're not broken or stupid for not seeing it until now. The reason why abuse cycles work is because they rely on the victim's capacity for love and empathy and forgiveness. You're trying to see the best in that person because you love them, while they only see you as a possession or as an extension of themselves that they can do with as they see fit. I've had conversations with people where they praise their Nappensaddam for something, usually the bare minimum, only to mention afterwards that they had screamed at them the same day, or hit them, or even coerced them into sex as a reward for that good behaviour. It's only when saying it aloud that they realize the nice thing the Nappensaddam did is nowhere near enough to make up for the other actions surrounding it. Something that I read on Reddit recently really struck me, which was the phrase, tolerable level of permanent unhappiness. It seems to come from a comment by To Save Oneself Trouble over a year ago on a post about somebody's shitty husband. As elaborated on by Global Release 4275, it's often expressed as, I knew you were unhappy, but I never thought you'd leave me. I would have changed if I knew. Yeah, You knew I was unhappy, but since it didn't affect you, you didn't care. You acted like I deserved to live in a permanent state of unhappiness, tolerable enough that I wouldn't leave. But as long as I'm not walking out the door, you aren't going to change. It also puts the onus on them changing entirely on you. As Snarkasms astutely pointed out on a post about emotional abuse in a friendship group, please tell us when we're being asshats so we can stop is still BS. They've conveniently placed the burden on you for their behaviour. You're now responsible for their behaviour. If you don't call them out, you're condoning their behaviour. That's the underlying context here, and it's wrong. They need to take responsibility for their own actions. Kink terms again, would a dom continue pushing a sub until they call red? Absolutely not. It's like saying you would wait for a puppy to squeal because you stepped on their paw before you exercise caution. It's nonsense. If somebody is capable of change, but they won't do it until they're forced to, that person is not worth your time. That scene in The Good Place feels particularly poignant when it comes to this.
Maybe she changed too.
No way.
Why can't you accept that she might be living a good, honest life? That she's an attentive partner and a good mom?
Because I wanted that mom. If Donna Shellstrop has truly changed, then that means she was always capable of change. But I just wasn't worth changing for.
You're worth more than somebody who allows you to be unhappy. You're worth more than somebody who allows you to be unhappy, whether they're doing so intentionally or not. Also, and I've already got a whole video on this in the works, so put a very large pin in this, but you do not have to forgive somebody who treated you badly in order to heal. You don't. If you want to, you can, but you do not have to. It is not a requirement of healing. Even long after you break away from the Narpansadam, you might appear snappy or overreact to situations because they're triggering to you. It can be hard to feel normal afterwards for some time. So much of emotionally abusive relationships hinge on emotional dysregulation. It changes the way your entire fear response works. It's designed to make you paranoid and distrusting because you don't want to ask for help. Your emotional dysregulation will be used as fuel for the Narpansadam, who will feed off your negative emotions and can also leverage them against you. You begin to question yourself about everything, and that's an extremely traumatic state to be in. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder is an incredibly common diagnosis for somebody leaving a DV situation. It differs from PTSD because that's usually considered to be caused by one event, whereas CPTSD is caused by commonly prolonged or repetitive exposures to a series of traumatic events within which individuals perceive little or no chance of escape. Emotional abuse is incredibly hard to recover from, and it's often hard to even get people to believe you because there aren't any obvious signs like bruises or holes in the wall. It can sound incredibly petty to people who haven't experienced it. One of my friends talked about a hearing they were at with their abuser and the way the Narpansadam would smirk at her every time the court representative turned their back, and how crazy she sounded when she tried to point it out. It made her sound petty and pathetic, because why should she care if he's smirking at her? But he knew exactly what he was doing. The psychological welfare that Narpansadam stoop to is extremely distressing for victims, and it's crucial not to minimize your distress or allow the people around you to minimize it either. Saying, my brother is mean to me all the time, or my partner is shitty with me, or even directly stating, this person is abusing me, can sometimes be taken with a grain of salt by other people in your life, and that can be hurtful or even damaging. I told my closest friends at the time about one of my abusers and the horrible time I was having with them, and they were kind of supportive, but not overly helpful. They acted more like friends hearing about an annoying coworker than friends helping me through a bad situation. It came out after I cut this person off that none of them believed it was as bad as it was, until I showed them the messages and played them the recordings, and then they seemed to feel apologetic for not being more supportive earlier. I don't talk to any of those people anymore, not least because one of them ended up being my next abuser, which in hindsight makes a lot of sense. I mean, if they were willing to minimize that amount of abuse, what were they willing to stoop to themselves? But to be clear, I shouldn't have had to play them recordings of me being abused or show them evidence of me being abused for them to believe me. What if my abuser was deleting evidence? If I come to you and I tell you in all seriousness that I'm in an abusive relationship, you should believe me and then take it with a grain of salt if you don't find evidence afterwards. People will show you who they are. It might take a while and you might not want to believe them, but they will show you. Try to surround yourself with people who will pick you up in an emergency situation, not the people who will mock or shout at you for getting in one. If you're not sure if you can talk to the people around you, Reddit can be good sometimes, actually. Don't get me wrong, it's not perfect, and Redditors are often too quick to jump to divorce, but there are a lot of benefits to an unbiased audience, or at least people outside your social circle, so you can get some perspective. There's a running joke about women in relationships asking things like, my husband beats me every day, but I do occasionally forget to do the dishes, so it's probably my fault. Am I the asshole? But a not insignificant amount of people in those situations have had it normalized to them over time. Emotional abuse beats you down, and we can laugh at how obvious it appears from the outside, but sometimes hearing it from the outside is the only way somebody might be able to figure it out. A lot of people have escaped really terrible situations because of Reddit. Just make sure to use a throwaway account and to leave out too many identifying details, because if the Nap and Saddam comes across it and recognizes you, it might make things worse rather than better. Just always take care with what you put on the internet. That's just a rule for everyone. I've also left a bunch of DV hotlines and resources below, in particular for the US, UK, and Australia, because that's the majority of my audience, but feel free to leave the ones for your country in the comments below, and I will add them to the pinned tweet so that we have as many resources available as we can. This is a worldwide issue. And finally, love yourself enough to leave a Nap and Saddam. Therapy and medication are good, they're great even, but they can't do much until you've removed yourself from the situation that is causing the problems. I like to think of it like a repetitive stress injury. Taking ibuprofen will make it feel better, but as long as you're in a situation where that injury keeps getting re-stressed, the problem will only get worse. Try to get out. Before it becomes so bad, you need reconstructive surgery, both metaphorically and also extremely literally. You are worth more than the treatment you are receiving. You are worth more than the person who is willing to treat you that way. You are worthy of protection and validation and love. I promise. I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the heaviest videos I filmed. It's one of the heaviest videos I've had to write. And I didn't want to get too much into my personal experiences. I need to keep a lot of my trauma to myself, because I don't think all the time that expressing your trauma constantly can be helpful. Sometimes it can just keep reopening the wound, but I do think it is important when helping other people, and it is important for recovery. Having community, being able to speak about the things that happen to you without feeling like you're becoming a burden on somebody, I think is incredibly important piece of recovery. It really is. I was talking to my friend literally yesterday about the worst therapy session I ever had, which is also the best therapy session I ever had. I'm hypervigilant, right? Lots of people who leave abusive relationships are hypervigilant. And I talked about how, if I enter a room, I need to be able to see all the exits. Where I've positioned myself in this room, the window is in front of me, the door is to my right, the other door is to my left, and I can see everything, right? Nothing behind me can jump out at me. When I walk into a restaurant, I have to have the seat with my back to the wall or in the corner. And I know this about myself, and I'm very aware of it, but I didn't realize it was as bad as it was until I was in a therapy session, and she said, well, why don't we check it, right? We test it out. We'll see where your boundaries are in regards to personal space and hypervigilance. And where I sit in my therapy session, little armchair, door, window, she's in the corner. So I know where everything is, right? Got out a blanket, and she said, you can fold this as small or as large as you want, and then you're going to put it wherever you want in the room, and you're going to stand on top of it. So I did that. She said, I'm going to move to stand in front of the door. And she got up and she moved, and I followed her with my feet. And she was like, does that make you uncomfortable? And I was like, yeah. Yes, it does. She's like, can you face away from me? She was standing 4 feet away. She promised me she wasn't going to come anywhere near me. And she said, can you turn around? And I couldn't. 25 minutes of my hour-long therapy session was spent standing on a blanket in the middle of a room, trying to turn and face away from somebody I knew wasn't going to hurt me. And the closest I got was I managed to sort of half face her so I could still see her in my peripheral. And then I turned slightly. And the moment that she was just barely in my peripheral, apparently my shoulders went up and I was shaking. And I didn't know. And she went, okay, stop, that's fine. And then we spent the last 10 minutes of the session with me sitting down doing calming exercises to make sure I didn't leave the session feeling really emotionally volatile. I had not realized how bad my hypervigilance was until I was literally in my therapist's office, someone who I trusted, who had helped me through a lot of shit, and I couldn't turn my back to her out of fear. The pressure that emotional abuse forces down onto you changes your chemical makeup. It changes the way you are. I'm pretty sure that most of my health issues come from the chronic stress I've had since I was 8 years old. And that sucks. Studies keep coming out that show that stress is like the biggest killer for people, and it sucks because I didn't choose to be this stressed. I didn't choose this. The best I can do is use this knowledge, use my past, to help other people to not be like me. So you deserve better. And I deserved better. And I still deserve better. I need you all to know that. You deserve to be able to enter a room with people you don't know and not have a panic attack. You deserve to trust the people in your life and love the people in your life and not be afraid that that love is misplaced. A lot of people talk about like regretting abusive relationships, bad relationships, and regretting the loving somebody. I don't think you should ever regret loving somebody. I think that's a really good thing. You're allowed to regret whatever you like, but regretting the things that happened to you and regretting letting that person in, I think is extremely logical, but I don't think you should ever regret love. Even if the person you loved took that love and used it and weaponized it against you. They only managed to do that because you loved them, because your love was good and pure for the most part, and I think you can't let them beat that quality out of you. You just can't, because then what was the point of it all? If you regret that love and if you allow that love to calcify and not let yourself trust other people and love other people in the future, they win. They still have control over you. I'm never going to tell you it's easy because it's not. It's so hard. But you can do it. And I can do it. I really, really believe that. We can do it. I'm sorry this was a heavy one, gang. I hope the next one will be slightly more cheery. Annyeong. Thank you all for bearing with me for such a heavy video. I would like to give an extremely special shout out to my 2 Roman Empire patrons. I am so humbled by the fact that people are even subscribing to that. But Selena Mealand and Ian Musa, you are absolute legends. Truly iconic. Thank you so, so much. An additional special thank you goes to my rooftop dwellers, Cast, Dana Brand, Nick Hook, BP's, Ace of Lights, Cal Kale, Best Stressed, Sunshine Che, Deborah Laban, Sarah Parker Schimmelt, Ghost Porcupine, Callum McLeod of Clan McLeod, Whoop Whoops, Lilac Rose, CS, Rihanna, Carolina, and Chris K. E. Teddy, Renelia Delgrange, Jelliwa, and Sunayama. And finally, the amazing people in my introverts tier, Sarah Parker Shemmelt, Wilmer H., Megan Shelton, Natracet, Summer in the Locked Tomb, CL Moriel, Paula, Stephanie Goodrich, Swarm of Bees, Alyssa Likeness, I See a Glade, Ellie, Stella Magic Owl, Amy, Blue, Nathan Fraughton, Claire McCowlin, Mikey Birtwhistle, Kay, Adriana Rodriguez, Madison Diebler, Fox, Joanna E., Dan R., Spark, Bryony, Kanani Jones, Nemo, Jumping Juniper, Sydney Sullivan, Shyla, Nina Nadine Frockling, Elias Bombach, Laura E., Jonas Holzer, Eric Ramey, Eric Nelson, Romy Bagel, Ruth, Reds Heads, Catherine A., Marcel De Jong, Jim Willits, Theresia, Caroline Baker, Mark DeLucci, Claire Gamu, Chris K., Nemo Boy, Commander Rainsword, Sonia Shapiro, Candy99, The Saddest Tadpole, and E. Teddy, Don Quixote, and Lizzie Newman.